Good morning. My name is Chris Fox, and today we are going to cover days 10 through 14 in the 15-day novel challenge. If you are just jumping into this video, go back to the first one because you're going to miss a whole bunch of stuff. For those of you that are arriving in the right place, this week was hard. It was hard. Not as hard as last week. So last week, the second half of the book, I think, was the hardest of my 3 weeks. This week, not so bad. I'm tired. I had a lot going on. I think the biggest problem, as you'll see throughout the videos, is that I'm also trying to get Crocs Rises ready for publication. I've got a big promo for the Magitech Chronicles next week. I'm making TechMage free for the first time ever. It's only going to be free for a few days. So I'm trying to coordinate all that. And then I've got book 5 needs to be ready and good to go. So I'm effectively editing 2 novels at the same time, which I've never attempted to do before. And it's kind of created a bit of a logjam. So it's been an adventure, but it's almost over. By the time you were watching this, I have probably finished Bert and it's gone out, as I mentioned. And Crocs Rises is not too far behind. That should be done by Monday. So it's been a busy month, but I feel like I bounced back hard in November with National Novel Writing Month. And here I'm accelerating into December with quite a few projects to go. So without further ado, guys, let's jump into this week and you can see how the editing went for the book. Spoilers, better than expected. There are less edits than I needed to do. So if you find that this video is not as useful as it would otherwise be, I apologize, but I got a lot of it right on the first draft. And so it just didn't take that much editing, as you'll see. Anyway, here you guys go.
Okay, so before we jump into the editing and exactly what it's going to take for me to turn this book into its, final form, something I can sell on Amazon, I want to update the last day. So where we left off is you got to see the first 9 days of this. Day 10, today, I finished the book. I finished the first draft, and I did very little work, very little work at all. I only did 2 sprints. One was 1,167 words, and the other was 800, and this is kind of where I ended up. You can see I did the climactic battle, and I did the second half of said climactic battle. So the first half is from Kit's perspective, and the second half is from Bert's. So we set up the battle where, things start off going okay, and then it turns against them, and it looks like the bad guys are going to win, as you tend to do in most climaxes. And you can see that here. There we go. Okay, and then Bert kind of gives his perspective on the same events that are happening. He's tracing his way along the wall, gradually approaching the Dark Lord White, and he starts climbing up the throne, and then, of course, has a hard time getting Dark Lord White to notice that he's there. And so eventually he climbs up on Dark Lord White's shoulder, just like he would do for Kit, and tries yelling, and that still doesn't work. And so Bert gets desperate. He decides to do something undignified and drops his trousers and pees in the Dark Lord White's face. So White is distracted. He notices Bert. Bert tells him to die, and he does so. And that's basically the end of the book. Bert kills him. Sir Patrick is suddenly freed, and Kit is suddenly turned back into human form, and the tide reverses. And while Bumblesnore gets away, Merlin and Gondef are both killed, as is the Dark Lord White. So we sort of wrap up the book here. Now, what I didn't do, and I thought about doing, was writing the epilogue. And here's my problem with that. You can sort of see the description here. But I need to really decide what the overall themes of the book are before I write this chapter. And so I could write something here, but odds are really high that if I do, it's going to get discarded. So what I'll actually do is just skip this, go through all of the editing process, and when I get to the end of the book, then I will write a chapter from scratch. So the first part of my editing, you're going to see in the next segment, is called the read-through, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to start all the way back at the beginning of the book and start reading these chapters. And then you're going to see more and more of these little triangles start appearing in Scrivener here as I keep adding notes for things that I want to change. Now, I might fix the occasional typo, but I'm not doing much beyond that. I'm just reading and digesting and sort of deciding what needs to change in this book and identifying areas where scenes need to be added, that sort of thing. So in the next segment, I will show you what things look like after I have done that read-through. And you'll notice that if you look at this, it's way, way more marked up and there's a lot more stuff there. And that's all the little places where I said, okay, I need more description. And, I've got to look at what is this person's name. And maybe I can add a character like this or tweak the scene in this way. I'll just have a whole bunch of those notes. And then once the read-through is finished, I'll go through and actually integrate all that stuff, and these will start getting chapter numbers, and the book will get longer. So anyway, let's jump into the next segment. You can see some of what that looks like. Okay, so as you can see, it is 6:25 a.m. Today is Monday, December 3rd. This is the last week of the challenge. I'm starting day 11. And today is the read-through. So I am going to read through the book. Today is my favorite day. It's the only day that it really doesn't feel like work because I get to read the entire story. And so here's what I'm doing and why. I am going to read through the entire book. I am not allowed to stop and rewrite things. I can add notes as much as I want. I can put these little triangular, placeholders as often as I want to throughout the book. But really, my goal here is not to fix it all. It's to get a sense of the entire story. If I can read this pretty much in one sitting, have this done, by let's say noon today, then I'll understand the story in its entirety. I'll have read it from start to finish, and I'll be able to see things that are not immediately apparent. Then we'll move into the next phase where we'll actually start the rewrite. But this phase is just about understanding the story. And so every time I run into something that doesn't seem right to me, maybe I need a new chapter, maybe there's an inaccuracy, maybe this chapter could need to be deleted, but I'm not 100% sure, I'm going to go ahead and drop a note. And so when you next see this document, when we jump to the next section and I'm done with my read through, you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of these notes throughout the book. The book itself won't be any longer, but there'll be a lot more information there. And then what we'll see for the rest of the week is this transforming into a finalized novel, one that is ready to be sent out to beta readers, or if I feel like it, just publishing it directly on Amazon. So let's jump into the next segment. The next thing you see is going to be me having finished the read-through. Okay, well, today was a long day. Normally, when I'm writing a book these days, I typically will take 2 days to do a read-through, and today I did it in 1. So it took a while, and it was fairly hard work, and I am very tired, but I'm glad that I banged it out, and it means that I am still definitely on schedule. I didn't want to risk any chance of me not finishing. Anyway, on to the book itself. You can see that, especially in the first few sections, now there are tons and tons of little triangles, but then right around the time we get to Road to Trials, it thins out. And so there are fewer changes, and there's less stuff that I'm messing with or modifying. Mostly the first part of the book is what's going to have to change, and that makes sense because when I first wrote the book, I didn't understand who the characters were. So if you look at some of the things that I've added, I want to make sure I have trope sockets represented correctly throughout the book, and I've got descriptions for each of the characters that I'm solidifying here so that as I'm going through the book, those are being done correctly and consistently, whereas right now they weren't. Let me see if I can find another good one that I can explain. This one's a little detail. Just Bert gets out a rake and uses it to rake copper, and so it's a little authenticity detail where I want to know what garbage did he pluck from the dump and use to make that rake. So just a little specific detail. Word writer is just indicative of me needing a name for that particular character. The copper rolls, there's a point where Bert ends up using copper rolls when he gets to the monster shop, and I need to set up that. So, you always pay off your setups and set up your payoffs. Well, I need to set that up here. I'm trying to think of some other good ones. If there was any that really leapt to mind that I thought were super good, you can see me open these chapters here. Yeah, I've got most of them open now, and you can see from most of their names that they're super easy stuff that I'm working with. Like, what color is this trope, and how would it look? Some of these are just questions to myself. This is the chapter where I've got Kanye and Edward Cullen, and I'm asking myself, like, is that too over the top? Is it too tongue-in-cheek? Does this chapter need to go? And so I'll have to make that decision before I go back through and write it. Yeah, I don't know what else to say other than that I really did enjoy the read-through. I learned a lot in the process about kind of where the book is at and what needs to be fixed. And I started to make some changes. So, like, for example, early in the book I was calling Master White Marvelous the White, and for continuity I've now changed every instance of his name to Master White, and you'll see that throughout the book. So anyway, we've reached the end of day 11. Tomorrow I start the actual editing, and so what you'll see starting tomorrow is that these chapter notes are going to disappear, all the stuff that I added. I'm going to integrate it in as I'm reading through. I'll be correcting typos, and I'll be looking at each individual chapter, and I'll say to myself, okay, what's the best title? And it'll actually say Chapter 1, Typical Adventurers, if I keep that. So you're going to start seeing that kind of advance through it. I've got to do about 10 chapters a day in order to finish it by the end of the week, which seems very achievable to me, especially since, today I had to read all 40 chapters. So yeah, I'm excited. I had a tough day, but I was expected. I'm in the tail end of the challenge and very confident that I will finish this in time. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up the segment and we'll jump into the next one. Okay, so as you can see, we have reached the end of day 12. Today was the first day of real editing, and you can sort of see what I did. The first 9 chapters have been kind of marked out, and this is, essentially how to look for the final version of the book. I finalized chapter names and got a lot of good writing done today. I did end up combining the 2 chapters that I had mentioned earlier. I guess that would have been, I think, chapter 5 and 6. So I actually went through 10 chapters today. Ended up with 9 finalized ones after the combination. Looks like tomorrow I'll probably get through the Road to Trials. I'm going to do another 9 or 10 chapters. If I do that 3 more days in a row, this book is done. So despite the fact that I had more work to do in the early chapters than I will in the later chapters, it still was pretty easy. Most of what I'm doing is shoring up description and making sure that everything lines up correctly and making very minor changes. So I'm just going through wherever I've got a character, like for example, the warg writer that Bert ends up meeting when he comes back to town, I named him. So now he is, I think, head warg writer is what I came up with. Let's see if we can find him. There he is. So I decided on a name. So before he was XXX, now he's head warg writer and will be throughout the book. So it was little changes like that, describing what he's seeing and who he's seeing. If we go back to the first chapter, Bert Smart, the description of the adventurers is much more fleshed out. It's very clear who each one is. All of the naming conventions are now uniform. So I took what was very raw and unfocused when I wrote the first draft, and I'm now sort of polishing it all. So anyway, I'm going to keep, I guess, this segment fairly short. And I think as a whole, this video will be shorter than some of the previous ones just because the editing is going a little easier. I'm not having to do as much this time around. And I will do in the last segment a comparison between the original version and the final version. And you guys can see sort of how the whole thing shapes up. Anyway, guys, it has been an extraordinarily long day. I'm actually editing 2 books in a row right now. I am working on this one, and I am also working on Crocs Rises, which I plan to publish on Monday. So my days are filled at this point, probably will be for the next week. But that said, let's jump into the next segment. Okay, we've reached the end of day 14. Wait a minute, Chris, what happened to day 13? Well, I looked at yesterday's chapters and I realized that I didn't have any content to deliver where I could say, okay, these were all the things that I changed. What I'm doing here pretty much amounts to very carefully reading through and sort of checking to make sure, like kicking the tires in each given chapter. So when I look at this chapter, like let's jump into one of the ones that I finished. I'm just going to grab one and, at random. Boom. I went to the first paragraph of this chapter and I'm looking to see what is the segue from the previous chapter? Does this sync up well? Is it immediately clear to the reader whose perspective that they're in? Because in a lot of chapters it wasn't. I would just start, end media res in the middle of the action, and it'd be 2 in the middle of the action, and so I would need to slow down and add maybe a paragraph at the beginning of some of these chapters. But beyond that, most of the changes are limited to injecting internal monologue in the scenes where it makes sense. So like if a character does something that makes Bert angry, I'm having Bert get a little angry in his head and you're getting some angry Bert thoughts. I am increasing the level and quality of description. So anywhere a specific character is mentioned, like Sir Patrick or Breakstuff the dwarf, I'm adding details and I'm layering them over time. So early on, you learn that Breakstuff has a big bushy beard and bushy hair that looks a little bit like a lion's mane. Later on, you learn that it's red. Eventually I mention his big bulbous nose. So you get little details for each of them dribbled out through the text, and I'm kind of adding that on this pass. I haven't deleted a single chapter. I combined 2, but these 2 chapters were, I had said in an earlier video, I was probably going to combine them, and of course I did. Beyond that, you're not seeing a lot of changes. And even some of my more controversial questions, I've chosen not to derail and go with sort of my original gut instinct. So I did keep Wanye and Edward Cullen in the book for the time being. They're going to make that into this final version. I decided that I didn't want to change that kind of humor too dramatically. I toned it down a little bit. I tweaked the dialogue a little bit. I made it a little bit less in your face than it was in the first draft, but I did keep some of that humor. And what I've decided to do is to pass out the draft of the novel that I'm finishing tomorrow
to beta readers and see what they think. Like, okay, guys, what is funny? Which parts of the humor do you like? And which parts are not. And so what's going to be different about this book than when I did the 21-day novel challenge with Destroyer is I'm not going to just turn around and publish it. I am finishing a publishable manuscript in the 15-day window. And in fact, it's 3:21 p.m., guys. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 chapters left. It's very possible that I may plow through some or all of that today. And if I do, I'll probably record another video segment. But whether I do or don't, this is definitely going to get finished tomorrow. And again, it is a draft that I feel comfortable passing out to readers. And I really want to get your guys' feedback because this is my first attempt at this type of humor. And what I'm hoping will happen is I'll get, 60 or 100 beta readers that'll come in and say, here's the good, here's the bad. And I'll start comparing sort of, their commonalities. Where are they coming from? Are they gamers? Are they random people that picked up this book? Do they match my target audience? And I think you can very quickly figure out what's going to work and what's not. And then I'll do one more round probably of changes in like a month or so based on that feedback right before I publish the book. And that is something else I decided. I'll probably wait and publish this in January when the market's a little bit less crowded. And I can also decide by that point if I want to write a follow-up sequel. So anyway, guys, the plot itself hasn't changed. You can see chapter names are really the only thing that's different, that's measurable. I'm not going to walk through the final text of the book just because I don't think that's valuable to you guys. And you will get to read it. If you are watching this video and you haven't signed up to the mailing list, you can do so and you will get a link to the Scrivener files for the current version, this finished version that I put together that I'm sending out to beta readers, and also to just download the ebook version of it, which I know for many of us is way easier to do. So if you want to read the ebook version of this, just sign up to the mailing list in the link below, and you should get a link sent out to you. And I would love to hear what some of you guys think of this book. Hopefully, this has been useful. You guys have seen how it came together. I feel like the editing is a little lacking, and what I think is frustrating for me there is that I'm just not doing a lot of editing. Like, some novels have needed major plot surgery. Like, I just got a bunch of beta reader feedback on Crocs Rises, and so I'm about to jump into Crocs Rises and make some alterations to the plot and insert some chapters early on. And unfortunately, with The Dark Lord Bert, that wasn't necessary. I didn't see a point where I wanted to throw new chapters in, and so the first draft survived largely intact. So anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this update up. I will continue to work on the novel tomorrow morning and finish that up. And so you'll get one more video on the challenge. I'll show the wrap up and what I've got and what my final cover is. And I might even talk a little bit about the launch. We'll see. So I encourage you in this video, if you're still following along, to ask whatever questions you might have and to give me whatever, list of demands you might be able to cobble together for next week's video. And I will tailor it accordingly. But at the very least, it'll have the last day. You'll get to see the final for this book. And yeah, I guess we'll go forward from there. Anyway, guys, thanks for being along for the ride. I do need to get back to the writing desperately. I need to get Crocs Rises polished and ready to publish by Monday. So I am going to go do that now. All right, guys, I will see you next week.